Hey guys, today I continue my journey into the world of student watercolors with these Grumbacher Academy watercolors. If you want to see how they handle, you'll just have to keep watching. I'm going to begin this review with a little bit of story time. Some of these watercolor paints you see here on the table are about almost 10 years old. When I was graduating from high school, about to start college, in fact, it was my first week of college at the University of New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina hit my fair city. I was one of the lucky ones. I didn't really lose anything except for pretty much everything in my dorm room. See, I was staying in Bienville Hall and I lived on the 8th floor. So everything, including my mini fridge, had to be tossed and our window got busted. So pretty much all of my bedding and any electronics that I'd left in the room were ruined. UNL was really devastated. It wrecked several buildings. There was water damage in pretty much every single building. I don't know if UNO has ever really recovered. And then LSU, see, UNO used to be part of the LSU, the Louisiana State University school system. Then they broke off and did their own thing. LSU was given the honor of distributing funds as needed to affected schools. LSU decided UNO did not deserve any money. It also decided several other schools in New Orleans that were not part of the LSU system did not deserve any money. So what ended up happening is most departments were pretty gutted. Most departments had a really hard time coming back after Katrina, especially the fine art department. The fine art department saw significant losses. Grumbacher actually donated a lot of art supplies to help the department get back on track. And the department just kind of sat on those supplies for a year until one of the professors was like, these are just going to waste sitting in storage, and basically handed them out. So some of these tubes of Grumbacher paint are from that time period. Some of them are very, very old. And then some of them are a little bit newer. They were purchased at SCAD when I was still learning about watercolor, kind of learning on my own. And I was basically purchasing any brand I could afford so I could figure out what I liked. And that's something I recommend that you guys do as well, because every artist has their own preference. So even though I no longer paint with Grumbacher paints, they are not my preference personally, I have a lot of fondness for some of these tubes because they've been with me through a lot. And I also have some fondness for Grumbacher for their generosity to my school after Hurricane Katrina, because we really did need that kind of support and it was greatly appreciated. So today I want to give these paints a little bit of redemption. I gave you guys all that caveat because I don't think any of these tubes are younger than 5 years old, and I think some of these tubes are over 10 years old and may have been kept in just horrific conditions because Hurricane Katrina. So I'm going to do this a couple different ways. I don't really feel like messing with the tube watercolors too much because I don't in general work from tube watercolors. I typically work from dried watercolors, either pre-purchased half pans or half pans I make myself. So I am going to do mass tone swatches from the tubes. Then I'm going to go ahead and fill some half pans and make a homemade palette, and we'll see how these reconstitute. Because you know what? Honestly, I've talked down Grumbacher over the years. I've told people to avoid it, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, and maybe I need to re-examine it. So it's time for a little bit of art supply redemption. So, as is the case with so many of these art supply redemptions, I am going to be doing my swatching and testing on Blick Premier watercolor paper. This is a cotton rag watercolor paper because I like to give my redemptees, is that a word, redemptees, the best shot possible. So step one, you're like a dream come, wait a minute, no. Step one, we're gonna do some mass tone swatches. And what I'm gonna do is I am going to just lay down a line of waterproof ink. Now, like I said, some of these tubes are real old. There's probably some disintegration that's going on. They may not hold up. This may not be a fair test. I'm gonna do the best I can. I will be as honest as I possibly can, and we'll see. We'll take it one step at a time and we'll see how they handle. So I've let my ink cure for a little while. We're gonna go ahead and get started. So we've got here cadmium yellow pale hue. All right, it has decided it wants to become one with the tube, which should surprise no one. And I'm just gonna go ahead and fill my half pan, or at least get as much into my half pan as possible. With watercolor, it's certainly true that if you don't use it, you lose it. Vermilion hue. Ooh, this must be one of the Katrina tubes because this does not want to move. For some of these, I may end up doing what I did in the Soho watercolor video, where I basically cut open the tube in order to get out the watercolor. So, in a way, this Art Supply Redemption is really good because it's going to help me move through some colors that have probably died in the tube. Oh, wait. Nope. I thought I was getting it out, but no. Just too exciting. I goofed anyway, because I have cadmium orange hue, I believe. This one will move. So these will end up being a little bit out of order, probably. A alizarin orange, a alizarin. Cadmium red deep hue. And I know this is one of the Katrina ones. They gave us a ridiculous amount of red paint. This one does not want to open. So I'm going to have to soak this one in hot water. Violet phthalo purple, and they spell phthalo as T-H-A-L-O with a trademark symbol after it. So I'm going to leave a little space. Oh, that's like a dioxazine violet. Okay. I see you. Ultramarine blue. Oh man, it's another one that's basically DOA. Well, dead into DOT. All right, let's try cobalt blue hue. Oh yeah, this one is definitely probably dead. Phthalo, T-H-A-L-O, green, blue shade. And this, friends, is why friends don't let friends hoard art supplies and never use them. Because you're going to end up with a bunch of dead tubes. That's okay though. I am going to make, actually, rather than making a separate video, I'm going to torture you guys. I'm going to make you watch me do surgery on these. And then you'll know how to salvage the last little bit of paint from your tubes if you can get it. Sometimes it's so far up in there that you really make a mess trying to salvage your paint. Ooh, okay. This is the first one where I had like a bunch of gum arabic just kind of spill out. So I'm a little impressed by that. Ooh, okay. That's a really opaque cooker's green. And to be fair, nothing I've swatched yet is particularly horrendous. And I do feel like student grade from tube watercolors tend to perform a little bit better than student grade from half pans. Maybe there's just less of a push to add optical brightener so you don't get as much mud. But the colors tend to be a little bit nicer. Okay, this is indigo hue. So this isn't actually made from a lake. This isn't a lake dye. This is a hue. I don't know how they would make an indigo hue. Yellow ochre hue. Why would you make a hue of yellow ochre? That's one of the cheapest ones to do. Okay. Oh gosh, this is another one that just does not want to move. Got to try and get 2 more on there. So that was burnt sienna. Oh wait, I can actually fill my pan from this. Van Dyke brown. And I'm using a paper towel on the stubborn ones to kind of protect my hand. This might be a stubborn one. And ivory black. So I'm going to set this aside and we're going to do a little surgery. We're going to go ahead and begin with our first patient, vermilion hue. And this has the potential to ruin the tube, so don't do surgery on any tube that you want to preserve. However, you can sometimes crimp the end back. Oh my goodness. It is like so solid in there. There we go. Okay, so it's gonna... Another thing about doing surgery, this can be a way to get the last bit out of a tube or to salvage a tube that might otherwise just be ruined. Don't do this to a perfectly good tube. If it's coming out just fine, or it just needs a little finagling and it's not 10 plus years old and sat through Hurricane Katrina, then it's probably salvageable without surgery. And you can also kind of reconstitute it by adding a little gum arabic to it or vegetable glycerin. I mean, what tends to happen with these kind of tubes is basically the gum arabic leaks out. So I'm just going to use a little bit of water to kind of get it to stick to itself. Actually, I'll just go ahead and swatch it. And unfortunately, I'm going to do that off camera. Did I cut off the whole name? No, I got plenty of room for the name. I mean, as you guys can see, there's plenty of paint still in this tube. So if I was like, oh, but this is my favorite color, I don't want to waste it. So basically, if it was alizarin orange, I would probably go to the effort of just filling several half pans with this and mixing in gum arabic and basically trying to breathe new life into a dead tube of watercolor. And Grumbacher watercolors, these are marked as $3. I would have to double check to see if they're still $3, but they're very inexpensive. Like even at Michael's, which tends to be notoriously overpriced for art supplies, unless you've got a coupon, they're really cheap. So, okay, all right. It seems we just want to make a mess today. All right, buddy. So now y'all see I got this little mangled cut up tube up there. That is the first one to dye. Some of these got messed up. Okay, this one is soft enough in the tube, but I can't get the top off. So I can do a couple different things with this. First, I can basically soak it in water and hope that dissolves the gum arabic that's basically glued it shut. I can soak it in hot water and hope that dissolves the gum arabic. Or I can opt to cut it open. There's several of these that I think I could get them open if it wasn't for the top. So I am gonna go fix a cup of hot water and set these in it for about 10 minutes, and hopefully we can get the paint out without having to cut it open. All right, so I've got them up in a cup of warm water over to the side. I think this is the only one I have to do surgery on. So we are dealing with a very, very old tube of cadmium red deep hue. And I've talked about hues in a couple of other videos, and I've written about hues as well. So hues occur in watercolor for a lot of different reasons. Yes, they are often a cheaper version of the pigment, but cheaper isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like with cadmium, cadmium is a toxic material. Cadmium will give you cancer. So often hues are used in the instance of cadmium so you don't get cancer, which I think most artists don't want to have a type of cancer. I lost my father to lung cancer. I can definitely tell you guys that's not how I would want to go. So sometimes hues can be a good thing. It's, yeah, again, it is a cheaper version of the material, but sometimes it's more accessible. Like French ultramarine is not real lapis lazuli. It's something created by chemists and is only possible thanks to, you know, Victorian era chemistry. But it's basically a hue because it's not actually using super rare Arabian lapis lazuli that only comes from one mine. And sometimes hues are used because honestly, even though maybe it's not rare, maybe it's naturally occurring, it's not toxic, it's just not being produced commercially. Most of our pigments that are available commercially come from the automotive industry. So if it's not a color the automotive industry can use, we're probably not going to see it. So hues don't always have to be a bad thing, but they are pretty frequently used in student grade watercolors as a cheaper or more health savvy, more eco savvy alternative to what was traditionally used. So that was cadmium red hue. All right, let's see if these have loosened up a little bit. Ha! Ha! I did it. At least one. So hopefully you guys have learned 2 new skills in this art supply redemption. You guys have learned how to budge stuck caps, which isn't rocket science. Ooh, like how I talk real big and then it's like, no, I don't want to open. I'm good. Look at that, it's like almost new. And then I have to swatch these colors. So really, I should be keeping better track. And then I have one more surgery to conduct. Actually, it might be 2. This one's got a plug and it doesn't want to move. All right, so we've got 2 more surgeries to do then. I'm gonna go ahead and cap it from the front just in case. And that's phthalo green. Okay, one more surgery to do. And that's gonna be cobalt blue hue. Oh, wow. Look how dry this one is in the tube. So I'm just basically shaking it out. Now we're gonna use a little bit of gum arabic. And this will basically just help it stay in place, since it seems like all the gum arabic kind of dried out of it anyway. And good thing this is a hue because I'm handling it. And this is cadmium blue, right? No, cobalt. All right, also toxic but beautiful. So it's a good thing this is a hue and not the actual pigment. All right, so I am going to get this mess cleaned up. I'm going to finish my swatches and check back in with you guys. All right, so I've finally gotten everything into half pans, everything swatched, and everything labeled. So from left to right, we've got cadmium yellow pale hue, cadmium orange hue, alizarin orange, vermilion hue, cadmium red deep hue, violet, cadmium blue hue, ultramarine blue, phthalo green blue shade, hooker's green deep hue, indigo hue, yellow ochre hue, burnt sienna, Van Dyke brown, and ivory black. That's a lot of hues, especially for colors that are typically not very expensive. So I wanted to show you guys something. Some of these tubes will list the vehicle, gum arabic, and then the pigment. So for violet, phthalo purple, it would be quinacridone. Oh, wait, where we go? Yeah, beta quinacridone violet, copper phthalocyanide. So PV19, PB15, and it has a light fastness of 2. Whereas on some of the newer tubes, it just says vehicle gum arabic and the light fastness. So it no longer lists the pigments inside. So I want to go over the pigments with you guys when they are available. So cadmium yellow pale hue has PY3, PY97. Cadmium orange hue has PY65, PY138, PO62, and PR188. So it has 4 pigments in it. Alizarin orange does not have any pigments listed. Vermilion hue does not have any pigments listed, at least on the tubes I have. Because like I said, old tubes have them, new tubes don't. Cadmium red deep, PR170, PR101, PY42. Violet, aka phthalo purple, PV19, PB15. Cobalt blue hue, PB29. Ultramarine blue does not have the pigment listed. Phthalo green blue shade, PG7. Hooker's green deep hue, PG36, PB15 at looks like a ratio of 4 because it's PB15:4, PY19, PBK6. Indigo hue does not have the pigment listed, which is a shame because I really want to know what they're using for their indigo since it's a hue, because indigo is typically a lake pigment made from woad, so the woad plant. And woad is typically used to dye like denim, aka indigo. So I would be curious to know what they're using as a hue because it's not like woad is expensive. Yellow ochre hue, PY42, and yellow ochre is another one. It's an earth pigment. Earth pigments are usually ridiculously cheap. Burnt sienna, PBR7, so pigment brown 7. Van Dyke brown, pigment unlisted, and ivory black, PBK9. So I am going to let these, some of them are very, very desiccated, but I'm going to let them dry out for a week and go ahead and put them in a palette. And then we're going to re-swatch them and see if they can actually stand being desiccated. So it's been about a week. It's time to revisit these Grumbacher watercolors that I set out to dry a week ago. I have here an opacity line as well as several watercolor brushes. So let's go ahead and get started with our comparative swatches. So since these watercolors have definitely been through some hard times, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I'm just going to put a dab of water on each and give them a chance to activate. Some watercolor brands need this time, some reactivate immediately. It's really up to you to know what you're working with. And I'll just give that a few seconds to soak in. Those have had a chance to soak in. I'm going to use a fairly stiff synthetic brush. And I sort of resorted my watercolors. So I'm going to try and match them up perfectly. And we'll see how well I do with that. I don't even know what color that is. For all of these, I was impressed by how well these reconstituted, despite me treating them like garbage over the years and some of them being through some really abysmal conditions. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a gradiated wash test, and then we're going to do full saturation mass tone swatches without the opacity testing. Now there is some opacity, there is some I guess opacity is really just the best word. There is some opacity with these. They are inexpensive watercolors, $3 something a tube, you know, that is something you're gonna get. But I'm also impressed by how vivid and vibrant some of these colors are. And I think this could be an adequate first set for people, so long as they understand that these are not going to handle quite the same way that something a little more professional like Daniel Smith or Winsor Newton watercolors would handle. So I'm gonna go change out my watercolor water and I'll be right back. Alrighty, art nerds. So I went ahead and I did the lift test on these, as well as labeled them with their names, as well as the pigments when the pigments were available on the tubes. I found that these were no more prone to lifting than any other watercolors that I've used. Some do sediment a little strangely, like the phthalo green has an interesting bit of sedimentation. I can't tell if it's because I'm using a textured watercolor paper or because the paint itself is old or what. But otherwise, these seem to be fairly finely milled. You're not going to get a lot of sedimentation or granulation, which would generally mean these are staining colors, so you're not going to be able to lift them fully from the paper. And I feel like that's fairly evidenced by my lift tests. And I completed those with a synthetic, a Princeton Velvet Touch synthetic. So all that is left for this art supply redemption, besides the full field test, if I so decide to do it, is a little bit of color play to see how these colors lift and interact and whether or not they turn to mud. And the way I do that here on this channel is I do it in 3 layers. I allow each layer to dry in between, and I try a variety of watercolor effects just to see how the watercolors react over layers and to see if there's anything we can discover, as well as any interesting color mixes we might find. Now, before I dive too deep into this last part of my Grumbacher Art Supply Redemption review, I want to take a moment to thank my Patreons. Even when I'm reviewing older supplies that I already have on hand, they still consume materials. And this is the last page in my Blick Premier Cotton Rag watercolor pad. That's why I have the bulldog clips up. It wants to pull up and buckle a bit. Now, I can only afford to buy these materials, even those for testing, thanks to the generosity of my patrons on Patreon. And I try to thank them in return for their generosity by offering early access to pretty much all of my video content, as well as backer exclusive goodies like weekly Patreon vlogs and monthly sketchbooks. So if you like what I do here and you want to help it continue, the best way you can do that is head on over to patreon.com/nattosoup and join the Art Nerd community. So I'm gonna go ahead and get rolling now with this mud test. And this is a great opportunity for me to really see what these watercolors are made of before I fully commit to a field test. Now the goal is, through the course of the 3 layers we're going to apply and allow to dry, we want to figure out whether or not these colors are going to lift, whether they're going to turn muddy, how they interact with other colors, whether they flow freely and we can get nice blends. We're basically putting the properties of these watercolors to a test. And this allows me, during my actual field test illustration, to either focus on showing you guys methods you can use to make the watercolors work for you if you already own them or if you've already committed to buying them. So that allows us to use the field test to test them out in sort of an illustration sense. And it also allows us to demonstrate how to make best use of the materials you've already got. So doing this kind of testing has allowed me to kind of shift my priorities. And I feel it's allowed me to better serve my audience. So right now we're doing some wet and wet testing. I've started to put down some semi-opaque and opaque colors. I've also tried to just put down a variety of colors. All right, I am going to let this layer of the Grumbacher mud test dry. I'll see you guys in a few minutes with layer numero 2. All right, so this layer is mostly dry. It's still cool in some areas, still buckled, so there is water under the surface, but we're gonna go ahead and move on. Now this might cause some muddiness, it might cause some lifting, but not every watercolorist waits until their paper is fully dry before they progress anyway. So it's not really something I'm concerned about, it's just something I thought I should disclose. All right, getting a little bit of lifting with this indigo. It wasn't necessarily fully dry though, so it's not surprising. All right, time to let layer 2 have a chance to dry. All right, friends, it is time to move on to our third and final layer. Doesn't actually look as chalky as you would expect, and there were some colors that are a little more opaque that might utilize optical brighteners like the yellow ochre here. I figured they were going to give chalky blends not quite as clear as what you would see with professional watercolors, but I think given the price, this is a little bit more than we have a right to expect, and certainly they behave a lot better than the Cadmiums I reviewed last year. Also, not as much lifting up as I expected. So they're fairly well behaved student watercolors, especially if you're working with a nicer quality paper like a cotton rag paper. And normally one would not be doing contrasting color glazes repeatedly. You might do one. Now, the cadmium red hue is a little more opaque, so in general, if you were painting, you would probably save this for your final layer because it can give kind of the impression of muddiness. But this opacity is just a quality of the color itself and not a reflection on the quality of the paints. The cobalt blue hue is a beautiful color. Mine is not quite as reflective of that beauty because, again, I didn't really put a lot of care into mixing with some gum arabic. I was just trying to get it in a workable form. I'm going to do some opaque colors as streaks. All right, now to let this final layer dry. All right, so this was our third and final layer. I think it held up pretty well. I think we were also able to develop some nice depth of color. So my final thoughts on these Grumbacher Academy watercolors before I see you guys for the field test. These are affordable student watercolors with a lot of hues, even for inexpensive colors like indigo and yellow ochre. They're also fairly ubiquitous. You can not only find these at art supply stores like Dick Blick or Jerry's Artorama, but you can even find them quite affordably priced at places like Michael's. So these are a good pick if you have difficulty finding art supplies, if you don't like ordering art supplies online, or if your options are kind of Michael's, Hobby Lobby, or bust. You'll be able to find the Grumbacher Academy watercolors. They work decently well from the tube, but I had better results when I let them dry in half pans and then worked from those. And you don't need to buy an expensive palette for that. You can even just fill bottle caps, honestly. And this is just a repurposed Altoid tin, so it can be very economical and it fits into a pocket. Now, these have been allowed to dry for a couple of hours. Some of them are still a little bit wet, but they don't seem drippy. Some of the watercolor brands I've reviewed here on this channel do drip and do leak. I will let you know in a follow-up video if that is becomes a problem for these, but I don't think it will be. Over time, some colors dried out in their tubes, even unopened, and had to be remixed with gum arabic. So it may be more worthwhile for you if you don't have gum arabic on hand, or if you just don't feel like dealing with the mess, or if you don't have a muller, which I don't, to just buy a fresh tube because the tubes are really inexpensive. The colors, at least the colors I've tested, and you know, that's what, almost 15 colors. I think I removed one because it was too similar to some of the other colors I had in my palette. The colors are fairly vibrant and reconstitute from tube well. And there's also nice wet into wet flow on cotton rag paper, like this Blick Premier watercolor paper. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful, useful, and informative for you guys. And if you're looking for some inexpensive student watercolors that actually deliver, you might want to check out Grumbacher Academy watercolors. Again, you can find them pretty much anywhere, but I will pop a few links in the description below to help those of you who, maybe would prefer to order them online. If you enjoyed this video and if you'd like to see more watercolor content, you can head on over to natosoup.blogspot.com and check out my watercolor basics series, or you can stick around, consider subscribing, because I do watercolor content all the time, and I have loads of great watercolor unboxing swatches and reviews in my watercolor playlist, which you guys can check out by clicking here. If you like what I do and you want to help ensure that it will continue for years to come, head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/natosoup and join the Art Nerd community. Art Nerds get early access to almost all of my videos, and they also get backer exclusives like sketchbooks, and as well as weekly blogs, and sometimes interesting little tidbits that I just cannot share anywhere else. So if you like what you see here, consider becoming an art nerd today. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you again really soon. And as always, have a great day. Bye, guys.